tomorrow, there may be some time before that you guys can just bring. I didn't know, I didn't want to.
Won't run anywhere, but
Yeah.
I prefer not to have the workshops the same night
Valley Regional Center?
as, city council. We have four
Like
presentations.
4
We
presentations.
get out.
And I was gonna read it. I was gonna see if I could get your phone. I'm so
I was gonna write you back, say, how could one ignore such a beautiful person like you?
Chuck, driving down the street, and I said,
Did I get any points for that?
what were you gonna say?
I said, how could one ignore such a beautiful person like you?
Oh,
Hmm?
I'm so embarrassed, I almost didn't come.
Mike's
Oh,
better
yeah.
than that.
Oh, wait,
Did you did?
You need to be friendly. I think we're good. Okay. And we got the voting machines, okay? Yeah, and we took, Chris off the online, I mean, the in-person, and put him on online. Okay. And so all we have to do is quick. All right. The combination. He knows what to do. All right. Also showed me something that I didn't know. On these,
Are you hanging in there? Good, good. Yes. Well, for you guys too, starting early this morning and then you're not getting out of here till whatever time we're done tonight.
I think we got it. I knew this was gonna be that way. I stayed late last night.
I was gonna take it.
Test.
But I didn't. I took, I left it, they're for you. But I'm not sure what are they?
Sounds like it's working.
Those are nice looking.
Should be all right.
Probably one.
Nicer golf tees.
PHA on there, they go 10 yards further.
There you go.
I will see.
Oh.
Mayor brought you trees.
Who did, the mayor did?
The mayor did.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. I brought two. Yeah, I saw that, he got two as well.
I'll crack that last one at 1 in the morning. It should be good.
Let's hope not.
Hi, Mike. Good, how are you doing? I see you. All right. Diana, hi, how are you?
Did you see my email about that?
So, Counselor, all good? Yeah.
I'll take it down.
He's
He
gonna
might show
watch,
up at 6.
yeah, and he's gonna just watch the workshop,
He's
but
just gonna
no.
watch, and then live stream only, yeah, and then Zoom for the meeting, so he'll participate, and we've got him on for the voting.
Okay, it is 4:00, and so we are scheduled for a workshop at 4 p.m. this evening. So we will go ahead and get that started, and hopefully get done a little early to stretch some legs and prepare for our city council meeting. Councilor Allgood is not here with us at this moment. He was going to try to watch it via live stream on that. So, and then may join us. Hopefully, he'll be able to join us via Zoom for the city council meeting. But with that, Director Collins, we'll turn it over to you for the workshop.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We'll try to make this a little painless for you, so it won't be too bad, but we want to go over quite a few amendments. As you're aware, we've been kind of going through the code, really looking at where we need to do code amendments, and realized that the whole thing needs code amendments. So we're trying to tackle this, package by package. So we've identified 5, and we'll see if we can get this going here. There we go. We've identified 5 amendment packages. I think when I sent out your memo, I might have said 4. Since then, we've identified another one that's going to be coming before you guys. It'll be both Chapter 10, which is our zoning regulations, and then also some subdivision regulation ordinance amendments we're going to be proposing as we move forward. We will try to only do workshops when we have items that are really big items that need to be talked about. Small stuff like just relocating stuff or, clarifying text, but not actually changing the code. Not going to take your time to workshop those. But I am going to go through some of the Package 1 amendments along with Package 2. Not in detail for Package 1 because they're not in-depth amendments. When we get through the Package 2, you'll see a lot more kind of in-depth amendments that are going to happen as we move forward. So just briefly, why do we need to update these ordinances? As we talked about, obviously we've had some inconsistencies in our code, in some cases some redundancies. We also realize we have some provisions that are not clear and are really confusing not only to the public but to staff as well as we're trying to review plans. We also realize that in our ordinances we're lacking code provisions where we should have some. We're looking at reformatting the entire code. We recognize that over the years, as you do amendments, they get kind of scattered throughout the code and nothing exists where it needs to be anymore. So then you're looking through the code in 10 different places to find requirements for, say, like low density residential. So we are going to be reformatting the entire code with the idea that it'll be much more user friendly for not only the public but for staff. But then also when we do future amendments, they're going to be a lot easier to do those amendments, and you'll be able to just plug and play them right into that section that it pertains to, and you won't be dropping them just wherever. We're going to also update them to propose some new processes and procedures, and then also just updating for development trends and technologies that need to be incorporated into the code, reflect current policies and practices, again, aid in reducing the number of future text amendments. And then as we get closer to the comprehensive plan, as you recall, we talked about like the current comprehensive plan that we have, we never went back and updated the zoning ordinances. And so you have inconsistencies between the ordinances and the comp plan right now. And you can't, your zoning ordinance is the only thing you have to implement the vision and the goals in that comprehensive plan. So as we start finishing parts and pieces of that comprehensive plan, you'll see future amendments coming before you as well, specifically for that. Yes?
I just need some clarification on what do you mean by text amendments? They're not written down, they're just texts, or what do you mean?
That's just what we call the ordinance when we amend the language in there, that they're text amendments. We're not amending the map. So you have an ordinance text and an ordinance map.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good question. Again, this is just a brief overview of the timeline. We're working very fast to get these amendments in place so that we can be ready for the comprehensive plan, so that those future amendments can be really quick put into the code, so that we don't have lag time. So you're looking at Amendment 1 coming before you in March, Package 2 coming before you in April, and those are the first two we're going to talk about tonight. We'll have Package 3 coming before you in May, 4 in June, 5 in August. And then we will begin our next round of ordinance reviews from staff on any more amendments that need to happen, hopefully to include part of those comprehensive plan amendments. So I'm just going to go through briefly the Amendment Package 1. Like I said, we're not workshopping this one in detail because it's pretty basic stuff. This begins the reformatting of our code, so it's kind of like playing checkers or chess. You have to move one section so that frees it up so that you can start moving things around. So we're going to begin with the annexation provisions in Article 1, and we're going to move those to Article 3, which is the administration section, which makes better sense because that's where you have all your zoning ordinance, rezones, comprehensive plans, special use permits. All of that is in Article 3. Makes perfect sense to move annexations over there. Not really doing a whole lot of amendments to annexations, except we are removing all of the specific language that talks about the different categories for annexations. And the reason we're doing that is that's already in the statutes. And we've already recognized that some of our code language doesn't match the Idaho statutes. So instead of having that language in there and having to amend them every time the legislature makes a change or something, we're going to refer a lot of that back to the Idaho statutes so that our codes are always up to date. The next thing is we're going to create a new section for split zoning. What that is it could be where you have a parcel or even a comp plan, but a parcel that actually has an existing split zoning. Portion of it is zoned residential and another portion is zoned commercial for whatever reason. The code has been silent about how to really address when there is split zoning, so we're going to add some language in there. It just kind of gives a process and procedure for split zoning. We are going to propose that somebody can't come in and request a split zone any longer. It just creates too much confusion. I don't know if that is the council's pleasure or not, but existing ones, we're going to deal with those, but we would rather them not request a split zone. You don't really need one. There's other mechanisms that you can do, like a PUD or something like that, to capture those different land uses within a development. We're also going to create a new section called Alignment of Zoning with Comprehensive Plan Land Use Designations. This is also for clarity for both council, staff, and the general public. It'll talk about when you have a land use designation in your comp plan, how do you align that with the zoning districts? A lot of people are under the impression that a comp plan designation is parcel specific. It is not. It's just a guide. And so if your parcel is, say, it's called out medium density residential, but say you have low density next to it and you want to be low density, we don't want to make you go back and do a comp plan amendment just so you can be low density residential if you're adjacent to it and it makes sense. So there'll be some guidelines in there that'll be both for council, staff, and the development community. And again, those will come before you where you can buy in on those or have comments of things you want to change on that. We've looked at other jurisdictions on how they're handling that, and that's where we got the guidance for this type of language for those designations. We're going to consolidate all the definitions into one section. Currently, right now, you have definitions in, I don't know, maybe 10 different sections within the code. It makes it really challenging for the development community, but it also makes it challenging for staff. We're going to take all the definitions and put them in one section, and those definitions are applicable to the entire code. So that way people know where to go to find those definitions. So most of them we're moving over. There'll be some new definitions. We'll provide you kind of a cheat sheet on those new definitions. And the reason I say a cheat sheet is because anytime you move a code section to another code section, even if you're not changing anything, it has to be underlined. So it could be perceived as it's new language. So we're going to help provide you some cheat sheets on those so that you know exactly which ones are actually just brought over from other sections or actually being amended. Let's see, we're going to move all sections dealing with violation of codes and penalties into one central location. Again, those are kind of spread throughout the code. So we're going to locate those all in one section so that any violation of Chapter 10 or Chapter 11, that you go to that violation section, and that's how you handle a violation of the codes. This is probably the biggest one in Section 1, in the Package 1 that we're doing. Currently, the code has one section called Amendment and Reclassification. It's supposed to address any type of amendments to the comp plan or the zoning ordinance. It really only has language for comp plan. It's very silent on how to address zoning ordinance or map amendments, which are rezones. And so we are going to split those out. We're going to create a separate section just to handle zoning ordinance text and map amendments. All the processes and procedures, all the approval criteria for how council would approve a rezone or even an ordinance text amendment. We're going to use the existing section because it has most of the language for comp plan anyways, and just kind of update it a little bit. And then we're going to pull development agreements out of that section and put it in its own article as well. And we're going to update that just a little bit too. And we're pretty done with these, so if council desires that we send these out earlier so you can start reading through them, we can certainly do that. So again, part of that, moving the parts and pieces. Currently, right now, the industrial airport overlay zone is in its own section, its own article. We're going to leave it there. We're not making any amendments to the airport, but we're going to change the title to overlay zoning districts, so that as we start moving forward, we can move all the overlay zoning districts into one section, and then we'd have them classified by like, okay, this is airport, this is, you know, scenic corridor overlay or whatever, and have, you know, then they have their own little sections within that article. We're going to create a new section and provisions for an administrative lot split. This is a little different than a simple lot split, which is also done administratively. This is specifically to address the land out there that maybe it's a parcel and it's being split by a right-of-way, but it's still one parcel. It's not two separate parcels. It has one parcel number. It's creating a lot of heartache for some developers when they have a parcel that's split by a right-of-way. They want to make it two parcels, but if the only procedure we have for them to do that is the simple lot split, and they have to meet certain criteria to allow them to have a simple lot split, so some of them don't qualify. We're also creating this because engineering, when they're doing reviews and they're like, have somebody that's putting in a right-of-way that is splitting a parcel, they want something formal so that there's a process that shows that right-of-way splitting those parcels in half. So it's just kind of a housekeeping item to keep everything straight. We'll do them exactly like we do simple lot splits, which is done administratively. They submit an application, it goes through all the department's review, and then they get approved and they go record it at the county recorder's office. General updates throughout the code. We found a lot of incorrect code sections, references. So we're going to correct those code section references, and then a lot of clarification, like I said, where there's redundancy or inconsistencies in the code. The subdivision ordinance, we're going to reformat a little bit of that right now. We're not tackling that whole ordinance at the moment. But right now, when you get to the section on prelim and final plats, it's kind of scrambled too. You'll have like, well, here's a provision for preliminary plats, then it'll go into final plats, and oh wait, here's some more provisions for prelim plats. It's kind of scrambled. So we're going to put all the provisions for prelim plats all in one section, go to final plats, one section, and then we're proposing to amend the process for submission and approval of final plat drawings. Right now, and I think we're the only jurisdiction actually that does this currently, you cannot submit a final plat until your construction drawings are approved and your infrastructure, part of your infrastructure has been put in. That's problematic on both sides for the developer, but it's also problematic for council because you haven't seen that final plat drawing yet. And if that comes before you and there's something that you have a concern with, they've already installed infrastructure. That's problematic. So we're gonna back it up. We're gonna have the final plat drawings come in with the construction drawings. We're going to bring that final plat before council to be heard. And the construction drawings can't be approved until the final plat has been heard. But then we won't sign the final plat Mylars until the infrastructure is in place and accepted by the city. So we're just changing it slightly where it makes more sense. And everything's looked at ahead of time in case there are problems with it or council wants to request some changes or something. We're not having somebody already go out and put in infrastructure and then need to change it.
Robin?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you again.
No, you're fine.
Explain partial to me. What would somebody put in, contract with some partial?
So like, for instance, the infrastructure, they don't require them to completely pave everything out there, but they have to have, the roads have to be like drivable for like emergency vehicles and that type of stuff.
Okay.
That's what I mean by partial.
Yeah, sorry, Councilor Williams?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry.
No. You're in the middle of a thought, and so you've said a couple of times it makes sense, and and it sounds like some of this stuff absolutely does. And you even mentioned engineering a minute ago when you were talking about those administrative splits. And so my question is there someone in engineering or outside outhouse that is getting a chance to look at this with you? Because you're stuck once we catalog this, once we approve this, they're stuck living with it, and they're the builders, engineers, architects, developers that are having to live with our code. And so I think in a friendly way, I'm hoping that there's some outside person looking in so that we can, once the hood's up, take care of it all, and then, does that make sense?
Absolutely, and that's a great question, Councilor Williams. Yes, so a lot of these changes, specifically with the final plat, is due to frustration with the development community of how, one, we do things so differently, so we're not consistent how they do it with other jurisdictions. Two, we've had a few projects where construction drawings have went through and then there's problems with the plat and has cost developers some money. So we're trying to counteract that. This is actually going to be a faster process for the developers. So we've ran it past quite a few of them. They're actually kind of excited for this process to be put into place. As far as engineering department, engineering has been working hand in hand with us on all of our ordinance amendments, specifically the subdivision ones, but even the ones that are in our zoning ordinance, we route everything to them to look at and comment on too, in case something we're changing might impact the way they do processes. So we've worked directly with Rob and TJ and Steve Pendleton and their engineering staff to go over all these changes that we've proposed so far. In fact, some of the amendments that you'll see coming in package 1 came directly from engineering to add to our amendments because they wanted some things changed.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. We've added some new sections and provisions in the subdivision ordinances. This is really just to help clarify some things. We separated out what's required for final plat signatures. We've separated out when you need to record your final plat and what does that entail. An example, we just had a conversation today and we've added some language that when you have a public pathway that you're required to put in, that we would like to make it a requirement now that you have to record that access agreement and that instrument number needs to be on your final plat when the final plat's recorded. That guarantees that that public easement for that public pathway is in place and stays with the land and that it doesn't go away someday. So we're trying to capture things that we feel like we've maybe been missing. Probably another big change is plat expirations, time extensions. We are proposing to increase those length of time. Like plat expirations, your preliminary plat, you have to record your preliminary plat or your final plat within 2 years. We're going to propose to extend that to 3 years. The reason for that is a lot of things. today's market, getting a contractor, you know, the schedules are backed up, even getting your design for your construction drawings is backed up. The time it takes for us to review the construction drawings, and then they can't record their final plat until certain infrastructure is put in. And so what we're seeing is a ton of requests for time extensions, and it's really because they just can't meet that deadline of construction drawings, getting review, getting infrastructure in, all that kind of stuff. So we are proposing to extend that to 36 months for just that first final plat recording, which I think will help reduce some of our time extensions. But in saying that, we're also reducing some of the time limits. So currently, right now, our code says you can renew an expired plat if it was approved within the last 10 years. We're going to propose to reduce that to 5 years, because that gives us an opportunity. If they haven't done anything on this project and it's expired for 5 years, it will force them to come back in and have to replat, which allows us to look at that development again. 10 years is an awful long time, and things change, especially in your comp plan and stuff over 10 years. And so we felt from a staff perspective that 5 years sounded better. They could still come in and request renewals, but if it's been expired, and it's been expired for 5 years, I mean, they haven't done anything and they haven't requested a renewal, it's probably time to just let it expire.
Question, Robin.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll give you an example. I had a call here the other day from one of the construction outfits. When, say for instance, the city blocks off a section of a road so they can do some work, and the contractor has to do some work on that blocked off area also, but they have to wait till the city gets done before they can do theirs. And then the city is taking a little bit longer of a time to do theirs, so their time was shorter, the contractors.
Yeah.
And if they don't get it done in time, they get fined quite a bit. So how do we correct that?
That's a great question, Mayor and Councilor Stoddard. There is some language in the code that if it's no fault of theirs, then that's fine. We'll go ahead and renew it. But
Okay.
if it's their fault and they just haven't done anything, then we're not going to grant a renewal if it's been expired for 5 years.
Good, thank you.
We did some amendments not too long ago about changes to an approved subdivision name. We're just kind of clarifying the code, sticking that in its own section, creating a process for if you change your subdivision name after it's been approved, you simply just need to fill out a request to have it changed. That's really just for purposes of us making sure that's not a duplicate name. Fire and life safety is aware of it, and so it's just really kind of a tracking mechanism for that one. So we talked about preliminary plat expiration dates. We're also doing the same thing for phased subdivisions. The way the code reads right now is that the first final plat has to be recorded within 24 months, but then every subsequent phase after that is 12 months. We're going to ask to increase that a little bit as well, but we're going to say that that 12 months is from the last final plat being approved, not necessarily recorded, because that's throwing people off too if they're going by the last, or I'm sorry, it was approval date, we're going to go by recording date, opposite, sorry about that. Because approval date throws them off because it gets approved, but then they may not be able to record for a couple months because of infrastructure, or 6 months. So we're going to take that time frame from the time of the last recorded plat. That's going to help people as well. But obviously, we're going to make sure that subdivisions are moving along the way they should be, that stuff is actually happening, and that developers are communicating with us so that we know what's happening on these subdivisions. Let's see, again, we reformatted it to consolidate all the provisions for final plats into one section. Again, amended the process for submission and approval of final plat drawings. Let's see, we also are proposing, right now the code allows the first time extension to be done administratively, and then it has to come to city council. I know in the past I've had some city council members say if there are certain things that don't need to come to us, don't bring it to us. We are going to propose that any time extensions for plats get approved administratively. Now, we would still have to approve them based on criteria, and that criteria is that it still meets their preliminary plat, construction, I mean, something's been happening. And there's still some language in there about coming to city council in certain instances, but we are going to propose that most time extensions are done administratively. And I think part of the reason for that is by the time they're requesting a time extension, usually the subdivision's already partially built. So, I mean, I don't know what we would do with it, you know, it's hard. I think the worst case scenario would be they'd need to come back through and replat again to finish up future phases or whatever, but I don't foresee that we would necessarily deny a time extension on something that is already built. And so we're just trying to address some of those things, and I'm open if council has any concerns on those. We're just trying to address some of those housekeeping items that maybe doesn't need to waste the council's time, I should say. But I also understand if there are certain things that council would like to see. So just please let us know that. So on the next one, amending the special use permit, we have had, so when we get extensions for plats, a lot of those plats, as you know, are tied to special use permits for multifamily development. What's happening is when people are getting the time extensions for the plat, they don't know they're supposed to get a time extension for the special use permit, and the expiration dates don't line up with each other. So we'd like to propose some text in there that says if there's a special use permit tied to a plat that has been granted a time extension, it will automatically extend the special use permit to the same extension date as the plat, so that they will just run consecutively. And it's really just to tie up administrative paperwork, because they would generally have to come in and file for a second time extension and go through that process. But if we can just do it all in one lump package, I think that helps staff, but it also helps the developers as well. And then just general cleanup to address current policies and procedures. And that's pretty much package one. So we didn't go into a great level of detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions. It's just there's not a whole lot of depth in the amendments for one yet, but we're happy to send those out earlier so that you can read through them in case you have questions. Yes.
I think Councilor Williams has got a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think sending it out earlier would be helpful,
Okay.
and
Sure.
then as we have time, it's not coming with a packet, and that allows us to read through it. We could always email you with questions later then, right?
Absolutely.
And now's the time to
Yes.
work on whether it's just the text or clarifying. So, yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Perfect.
Councilor Dittenberg.
Yes, Robin, thanks. Since there's not of depth here, I'll ask shallow questions. So, but I want to go back to some of your earlier comments about like uses, conforming uses, R2 being next door to R1, split zoning, and map amendments. So, what drives a comprehensive plan update? Map amendments, split zoning, or what governs split zoning and map amendments, the comprehensive plan?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the driving factor in this whole public planning process?
Mayor and Councilor Dittenberg, great question. A lot of things actually can drive a comprehensive plan amendment. One of the biggest things that drives a comp plan amendment is when you have a lot of applications requesting a comp plan amendment. You know that there's definitely something that needs to be looked at in your comprehensive plan. The other thing that can drive it is policy change, administrative policy direction, a community's vision for where they'd like to see their community go. It's kind of like a master plan. I mean, you should, they do a comp plan for long term, but you should always be reviewing it every couple of years, at least internally, to make sure you're still on the same page. That vision is still applicable to your community. With this particular comp plan amendment, I can tell you what is driving it is we've had a lot of comp plan amendment requests. I would say just about almost every application that's come forward in the last year had a comp plan amendment request tied to it. And so we felt like we probably need to relook at that. I say the other reason for that is when we look at our comp plan, there's very little guidance in our comprehensive plan right now that really gives even staff guidance of how to apply what's in that comp plan to your codes. We're missing that. It doesn't address transition of uses, which there should be some type of guidance in there that directs us how to revise our codes to help implement that code. So our comp plan is just lacking a lot. And just moving forward as we're growing, we felt like it would be very beneficial. Now's the time to relook at it while we are growing so fast.
I have another question, if that's okay?
Yep.
So first of all, I've had the opportunity to work with your staff, and they've done a great job. And I've
Yeah.
actually proposed some language and some stuff that I'm working on, and they've said something like, that's ridiculous language, where'd you get it? And you go like page 16 of the comp plan, and they go, oh, well, we don't like that. So I'm glad that we're addressing all of these inconsistencies in the comprehensive plan. But one of the questions that I have about the administrative lot split, a few years ago, I was involved in some discussions with the county, and it may have been more than a few years ago, so don't hold me to my memory. But the issue they were dealing with lot splits was people were coming in and doing an administrative lot split. They were being granted based upon a policy or a procedure, and then they were coming back a couple of years later and going, well, what else am I supposed to do with it other than build a CAFO on it? I mean, it's small. What else am I supposed to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
So is there some sort of a backstop measure that we can say, if you're going to do a lot split, it has to be for some sort of conforming use, you know, in that area, and not some, you know, you're doing an administrative split, and of course the only thing you can use it for is, you know, a bouncy ball pit. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilor Dittenberg, yes. So both our simple lot split has language in there that they can do a simple lot split if they meet certain criteria, like it's been in the original configuration since a certain date and time. But that when they do that split, we also look at to make sure it's a conforming lot. They can't create a non-conforming lot. Same thing with the administrative lot split. We're going to allow them to split it because of a right-of-way, but those parcels that are left over, they have to be parcels that are going to be buildable, and they have to meet those requirements, and there is language in there to help ensure that. That's a good question.
Any other questions? Yes, Councilor Stoddard?
Robin, on the definitions, this isn't a recommendation, just kind of a thought. Are you gonna index those, definitions separate from the other, requirements that you have? In other words, if I had a plat plan, I looked up, a certain item on the design, and then I can go to the index tab and look what the definition of your words are, that wording is that the way that's gonna be set up? Or is it?
Are you thinking like an index in the back of the
Yeah,
code or something?
yes.
We hadn't thought about that, but we could certainly look into doing something like that.
Instead of having a definition explanation, each one of those tabs, maybe just the definition index tab, so they can go back
Sure.
and forth like that, just something to consider.
Yeah, that's a great comment, not a bad idea. Because we've struggled with definitions, right? Because it's like, somebody may look up, animal hospital, or somebody may look up veterinary clinic, you know, it's kind of hard, like, and so maybe there is an index for anything that has to do with animals, and it tells you where those are, or something.
Or childcare.
Yeah, something like that.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
that going on.
that's a great idea. Yeah, we can definitely
Just a thought.
look at that.
Any other questions?
Okay, we're gonna move forward, but this is amendment package 2. This one's gonna be a lot more detailed. I'm just gonna do a portion of it, and then I'm gonna hand it over to Joe. He's been working very hard on proposing a lot of these text amendments for us, so I'm gonna let him talk through what he's worked on so far. There we go. So just a brief rundown of what package 2 is. We are moving all provisions that are applicable to all zoning districts into one article. What that means is that right now we have a separate article for landscaping and a separate article for trees. Well, those are actually applicable to every zoning district regardless. So we're going to create an article that is standards that are applicable to all zoning districts. And then you'll have specific standards for that zone, but we're going to move those into its own article in the code. Again, with that same thought, we're going to relocate all your code provisions that are use-specific into a newly created article addressing specific use provisions. So this could be something like I'm gonna have a restaurant with a drive-through, and I want specific requirements for the drive-through. So I'm gonna put that in the specific use provisions. That's gonna be, what that means is that's above and beyond all the other general requirements. So we're gonna relocate those. And it would be things like home occupations, your adult entertainment businesses will be located in there because they're gonna have specific requirements. So all those unique uses where we wanna provide specific criteria or provisions for those uses are gonna be located there. And we have come up with a bunch of new uses that we wanna create specific criteria for, that we're gonna also be proposing. In the downtown section of our code right now, we have it's called Central Business District Code, and then there's a mixed use district, which includes the traditional neighborhood and highway corridor. Really, those are all mixed use districts, so part of our rewrite of the code and reformatting things, we're going to take an article and call it mixed use zoning districts. And in that, you'll have your downtown districts, all their requirements. Then you'll have traditional neighborhood and all those requirements in highway corridor. And I'll get into some of the problems more in depth with the downtown code because you're going to see a lot of changes in the downtown one, and I'll try to explain why you're going to see a lot of those here in just a minute. Again, traffic impact study requirements and impact fees, we're going to move those into the administrative article. We're not making any amendments to those at this time. We're relocating plan unit developments into its own separate article. Right now, it's just a code section mixed in with a bunch of other things. We're going to put it in its own article, and the reason we're doing that is we anticipate with the comp plan, we definitely want to rewrite the plan unit development zoning ordinance to be more robust, and we anticipate that there may even be some ordinance language for master plan communities in the future. So, on your downtown district, and I've got a map up there for you, the blue and the whatever yellowy green color and the pink, that's all considered the downtown. Within the downtown, there's actually two, what we call sub-districts. The blue is the central business district. The yellowy green color is the city center, or the core of your downtown. And then the pink is what we call kind of that local historic area where we have some requirements for how you can design your buildings in that location that are specific to preserving historic buildings. The problem we found with this code is that when they labeled these as Central Business District zoning and City Center zoning district and Indian Creek Corridor zoning district, those aren't really truly zoning districts. There's only one zoning district that was ever put into place, and that was the City Center zoning district. So we need to go back in our code and amend it to make it appropriate. We need to actually adopt those zoning districts, which would be the downtown overall zoning district with a city center and a central business district sub-district. So these are kind of general housekeeping items as well. With the Indian Creek Corridor, the City Center Design Review, those were also labeled as zoning districts, and they're not truly zoning districts. They're what we call Design Review Overlay districts. And so we're going to create those overlay districts. An overlay district is above and beyond. So you'll have your base requirements, and overlay gives more requirements on top of your base requirements. And that's what those three are, but they were never actually formally adopted that way. So we're kind of cleaning up the code that way as well. The other thing that you're going to see with the downtown district, it's going to look like a major change, and it is actually, is in our land use schedule right now, we should have had a column for city center and central business. There's only one column, and it says city center. So currently, we only have land use chart for the city center, which is the green. So we've had to use the city center land use schedule for all of the blue as well. So we need to fix that. And so we're working on that. And the reason I say that's important too is there are some uses that you may allow in the blue, the outer area of your downtown that you would not want in the green. Example of that would be, currently, right now, the land use schedule says you can have restaurants with drive-throughs. In a true downtown core, where it's supposed to be pedestrian-oriented and walkable, you don't want drive-throughs. So we're gonna actually be proposing, and I'm gonna go through some of those in a minute, we're gonna be proposing to not allow drive-throughs in that green area. You can do walk-ups, you walk up window, no drive-throughs. It takes up too much land, but it also makes your downtown more vehicular-oriented, which is completely the opposite of what you're trying to do with the downtown. You want it to be pedestrian-oriented. But those are uses that are probably gonna be allowed in the blue, because that makes more sense. So here's just an example of the land use chart that we're using right now. As you can see, it has one column. Some of the things we want to look at too is, like right now, which is kind of confusing because it has single family attached, and then, which that says a special use permit, but then if you go down 5 more, it says dwelling townhouse, which an attached is a townhouse, but that's permitted. So it contradicts itself. So we're going to fix some of the language in here so it's not, contradicting itself. But the other thing we've talked about is in your core again, in that smaller green area, you really don't want single-family homes in your core of downtown. You do want things like apartments, condos, those types of things, but not single-family. So we're going to look at not allowing single-family homes in the city center core. But it's probably going to be allowed in the central business. But again, you want more like townhomes that are in a row. You don't want a single-family detached dwelling with a big yard, because again, that goes against that whole like walkable downtown kind of environment. So we are going to be proposing some changes, and as you can see, I've struck through the drive-through establishment. That would be for the city center. So we want to get rid of some of that stuff that's in there. Did you have a question?
Yeah, could you go back to the map?
Sure.
And maybe it's just because I was in the meeting last night, but you're taking into account the historic district that the Preservation Commission oversees as well.
Absolutely.
That's a whole other overlay on that map, right?
It is, and we're not making any changes to that. What we're doing to that is just simply classifying it the way we're supposed to. So we're going to create the overlay zone, that it's a design, Indian Creek and a local area historic overlay, design review overlay zone. We're not proposing any changes to the requirements within that. And we're not proposing any changes to the design review stuff for the city center or the Indian Creek corridor at this time either.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, absolutely. The only thing we might come back with at a later date is to propose some type of basic design review criteria for the central business district. Right now, there isn't any. We have design criteria for the green and the pink, but nothing for the blue. And because that is part of your downtown, and it is a major gateway entry point into your core, we really should have some type of base guidelines for design, and I'm going to let Joe go more into that in his presentation.
I have a quick,
Go
Sure.
ahead, please, first.
just a quick question. It's kind of hard to see the boundaries there. Is that Cleveland to?
It goes, so it's railroad tracks
Uh-huh.
to, and I can't really see
To
that.
Cleveland, right? And then from,
5th to 10th.
This is Grant down here.
well, just in the green area.
This is in the green. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Cleveland,
Uh-huh,
and this is Fifth,
uh-huh.
railroad tracks, and 10th.
Okay, I'm just trying to think. So, I know you said no drive-throughs in that area, so the gem in and out is out of that area, right? Like by a block? If there was anything that's already there, will they be grandfathered in?
They
then?
would. They would be
Okay.
legal non-conforming uses, yes.
Question I had, Rob, your department ever think about, when you talk about pedestrian friendly, and I probably won't see it in my lifetime, but if we shut off, say 10th to 5th, no cars on Main Street, just pedestrian, have anybody ever talked about that at all, or?
Mayor and Councilor Stoddick, I don't think we've talked about it from a city's perspective.
Mhm.
I think it's a fabulous idea to have those conversations of, can there be certain blocks? I mean, I think we are doing that with, is it Arthur? I'm sorry, Mayor.
So they're looking at, Arthur, Rob maybe can chime in on this too, a portion of Seventh Avenue, like a festival street.
Yeah.
That has been contemplated.
Because a lot of the successful downtown areas the smaller towns like we are, when they have a pedestrian-friendly main street, lack of better words, it's just so much more successful, not only for the businesses, but the restaurant owners and everybody else. So anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It's nice to have those, kind of like the Basque Block in Boise, where they have the rolled curb, or no curb at all, and they have things in the street where they can put bollards in, and so they can open it up to vehicles, or they can close it off to pedestrians when there's major events. Very successful in downtowns. So we'll be coming through with some of these proposals, and again, when we complete these, we're happy to send those out early. You can look through them, and then if you even want to schedule a meeting to meet with us, or you have questions, feel free. These are legislative matters. They're not quasi-judicial, so you can talk about them all you want. Oh, okay, this is going to go into Joe's stuff, so I'm gonna get out of the way.
Thank you, Rob. Mayor, Council, good evening. I guess it's evening officially now, right? So I've been working on quite a few of these updates as well. The ones that I've really gotten into so far for package 2 have been the accessory use standards, fencing regulations, let's just honestly clean up like grammar. Let's put a comma here, let's take a comma out here, not changing anything there. Temporary use standards, kind of same thing, just kind of updating grammar and formatting with everything else. Landscape code, and then your favorite, multifamily. So there's, what I will focus on mostly tonight would just be the accessory use standards, the landscaping, and the multifamily, because those are the ones that I've been most in-depth with. Mostly with accessory use, it's really just been, the biggest change is going to be to what we're proposing to do with ADUs, just to help with the housing affordability, multi-generational housing, et cetera, and just the overall availability of housing. So currently code requires a special use permit for an ADU in RS1 and RS2, and then permitted in R1 through R3. We're proposing to just have it permitted in residential districts. Yes, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. Some jurisdictions also call it a secondary dwelling, mother-in-law suite, casita. There's a lot of different names for it, but typical nomenclature is just ADU. So we're proposing to allow them permitted by right in all the residential districts, especially the larger ones, because if you have a larger lot, I think that makes even more sense than a smaller lot to have an ADU for many reasons. Also proposing code to allow ADUs in the historic district, and that is because we actually reached out to the Idaho Historic Preservation Society, and they said that that is a great idea and a great way to help increase the availability of housing in those existing jurisdictions. That is really infant in its implementation right now. I haven't actually written that code language, but that is something we hope to do to help just, again, with the housing availability. And again, general just cleanup of the code, accessory use standards, and throughout all of these amendments. For landscaping, we're proposing to amend code to just, again, clean up to match the new formatting, delete the definitions so that they can go in the overall section, which was really fun. And then again, general cleanup to the landscaping code too. Like Robin had said, there's a lot of discrepancies between we require it here, but we don't require it here, et cetera. It just makes it really hard, and many developers have come to us and been like, what are we supposed to do? Is it this requirement or is this a requirement? So we just want to make sure it's cleaned up for everybody, and that's for staff too, so when we're actually reviewing the projects. We're also proposing to remove specific plan requirements in the code. So currently it lists like everything that's supposed to be on a landscape plan. I don't know when the last time that was changed, but those things evolve. And when you codify those things, you have to do a code amendment every time to change what you put on a checklist. And it just is really cumbersome and not something that really council should be worried about when that's why you hire us. So we're proposing to just reference the checklist. So that way, if we need to make changes or council wants to say, hey, we need to see X on it, we don't have to do a code amendment just to do that. We just change the checklist. Also, the second one, which is probably more controversial, is just I'm proposing to reduce the minimum sod requirement. Currently code is 70%. I'm proposing 50%, and that's just trying to, in the spirit of good planning, try to help reduce some of our water use. In my previous position, I worked with Nampa to completely rewrite their landscaping code, so I have a couple examples that we use there to just, it's not reducing the landscaping, it's just reducing the grass, because grass is very water intensive, and usually people don't irrigate them correctly, and you get a ton of overspray, and you're watering your sidewalks. And so that's just wasteful. And so the point is to just reduce that a little bit, and you would then therefore increase the amount of shrubs that you would need, which are usually less water intensive. And then also a general update to the entire common open space section to just change which areas qualify, which ones don't, and the minimum amounts. Councilor Williams?
Are we open to xeriscapes in this rethink?
I am absolutely open to xeriscapes. We have some provisions currently in code that call it dry landscaping in industrial areas, but that's pretty much only section. Absolutely open to having xeriscape in other areas.
I would like us taking a close look at it. Now's the time to do it.
Agreed.
And there's a lot of reasons we could discuss outside of the workshop that would take up time, that it makes good sense. And so I'd appreciate you including some provisions for that as well.
Absolutely. If that's council's direction, 100%. I can do that. And there's other jurisdictions that do it in the valley, like, again, Nampa has significantly changed theirs. And then obviously places in the southwest. But what I, to your point, want to avoid is getting to where we have to do some of those crazy requirements that the southwest is doing because we weren't water-wise on the front end. So let's be ahead of that curve. So I completely agree. These are examples that I took from their little handout that Nampa made and had made. So the red would be what typically is associated with landscape buffers, especially that top left one. You know, you have grass and trees. That's it. The other one would be replacing that with less grass and more shrub beds, things like that. It's not uglier, contrary to some people's beliefs. If you don't have seas of grass, then it's just not green, and that's not true. I mean, you can, again, looking at the bottom left, you have a bunch of rock and shrubs. That's clearly not going to meet mini codes, but still, that was approved somewhere. And then you should have these larger landscape beds, especially on hilly terrain where grass doesn't irrigate very well, et cetera. And then on the right-hand side, same thing. You have an existing buffer around the corner. Why have grass there when it's minimal? You could have shrub beds there again. Limit the water usage. Also, much more visually interesting. And this is I pulled these right out of the new code that I've written to just reduce some of our reduce the categories of our requirements for the lot size. So currently there's 5 lines in this table. I'm proposing to reduce it to 3. It generally will be an increase in the common open space required as a percentage. So this is what we're proposing right now. 12,000 and over, I think, is 4% in code, which is considering, like, related to other jurisdictions, it's significantly less than everywhere else. Even the 8,000 to 12,000 square foot, again, I think it's at 6, so I'm just bumping those up 2%, and then taking out the bottom 2 categories that were below 8,000 to say you should be 10% common open space. And again, open to discussion on any of that. Still in landscaping, I'm proposing to amend the street buffer section to increase the widths and simplify the table. And again, change where the buffer is to be measured from. The measuring point is something we're still working through engineering with to make sure that we're not impeding them and making difficulties for the developer either. Secondly, amending the land use buffer section to simplify what the requirements are and to make it more easily understandable. And that's the land use buffer where we have right now, like, class 1 through 5 and these arbitrary lists of uses that are not all encompassing but also really vague. And then this other table, it's just very confusing. I've had probably the most complaints I've had regarding buffers in the city so far since I've been here have been regarding this land use buffer table, where, as an example, you require a 20-foot buffer in a residential development against vacant land that is proposed or planned for future residential development. And I've been told it's a major impediment to housing because all that money is getting tacked onto the housing costs that our residents that they're going to pay. So just trying to simplify some of that, that's more logical and makes more sense to what the rest of the valley is doing too. And then lastly, just adding a landscaping and screening section because we technically don't have any right now in code. So this would be an example of the buffer sizes that I'm showing. Just, we have so many minor arterials, major arterials and arterial. So let's just call it that and increase the buffer width to 25 feet. Same thing with the collectors. Doesn't really matter if it's minor, urban, et cetera. Just require 20 foot. That's pretty consistent across the valley. And then just lumping all the state highways, US highways and interstates, just to refrain from having to reference each of them as Highway 55 or 2026, et cetera, at least in the code section, and increase that from 30 feet to 35 feet, which is also pretty consistent with other places in the valley. And on to multifamily. I hope we can talk about this. The existing multifamily code is it's literally just an internal circulation. That's all it talks about. That's it. So something that we wanted to do was go in, especially at the direction of what council has said multiple times regarding the lack of certain design standards and et cetera for a multifamily development. How do we do that? So we're adding to that code beyond just the internal circulation. We're amending the applicability section to clarify that these are only required in certain instances, which is consistent with a new definition of what we're calling multifamily development, which is when you have 3 residential dwellings on one parcel. So 3 duplexes, 3 triplexes, whatever, may be permitted by right per the zoning code and the land use schedule. But once you get to that 3rd residential unit or 3rd residential structure on the site, you will trigger the multifamily development standards. So that way, when you're getting these odd, I've seen it multiple times where you have 100 duplexes on the site, technically our current code does not require them to have any extra open space because the duplex is a use and multifamily is defined separately. So now those would trigger these requirements that we are proposing. So it helps the city cover ourselves and actually get the development that we want, including some design, like building design standards. With that, we added minimum site design standards that are including like setbacks, buffering, height transition, and overall just pedestrian connectivity. So bear with me as my drawing skills are shown on the next slide here, but this is some code language that we're proposing, just site design stuff, requiring a minimum setback. B is probably going to be of particular interest to all of you. Proposing if it's directly adjacent to existing single family or planned low density on the comp plan, then you're going to have a minimum 25-foot buffer. Option 2 would be you can reduce that to 15 feet, but you're going to have 25-foot max height limit, and then you can step it, which is typical in a lot of different jurisdictions outside of Idaho, et cetera. So an example of this, again, I drew this in PowerPoint, so bear with me. We don't have CAD available for me to do it. I don't know if I'm smart enough to use CAD anyway. So. But this is just an example of that, of how that would work. I don't know that it's to scale, but it actually might be pretty close. So.
I think, I talked to Robin about this several months ago when we met, but the biggest complaint we always get is when apartments are pretty close to single-family developments and people in the apartments can look down on folks' backyards.
Sure.
We need to correct that, so.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is an attempt to do that. One, pull it further away to have that buffer, 25 feet. When you have vegetation in there, especially evergreen trees that are actually going to provide coverage and visual screening all year round, will definitely help with that. And again, some of those buffer requirements are part of the landscape code that I'm working through to implement and make, I guess, denser landscaping requirements, to be honest with you. And then the option 2 would be the step backs, which I've seen people prefer that in a lot of cases because they'll have a 2-story house, and then now the apartment building is only 2 stories directly adjacent, and then as it steps, it gets even further away, and it's less of an impact. But again, open to feedback on those. Maybe 15 feet isn't right. Maybe it's 10. Maybe that's 20. Unfortunately, some of the actual numbers can be arbitrary, but the more people we have that know what they're doing, looking at this, the better. So I'm absolutely open to feedback. Continuing with multifamily, I've added specific comment on private open space requirements, minimum design standards, and an alternative compliance section. So specific comment in private open space, I'll be honest, I basically copied and pasted a lot of the base of this from the Meridian code that I'm most familiar with, as well as what I have worked with a lot of developers there that understand it. It's familiar to them. They're not going to be like, holy crap, what is this? they're gonna understand it. As well, it's not overly encumbering to them either. Private open space, same thing. So like what we're proposing is 80 square feet per unit. So that would be like porches, decks, things like that, that is private to the unit. Right now, again, we don't have any of those kinds of provisions to require that private open space for each unit. And then design standards, I guess I should have put architectural. That's what I meant by the design standards, actually building. And so this would be examples of what I'm proposing for the building design standards. You know, building form would obviously mean the actual structure itself. You know, wanting some wall modulation, things like that, multiple materials, especially the stone, heavier materials, anchor that to the ground with those along the base of the buildings. There's a lot of that stuff that goes into that, but this is an example. 6 is not the full section. I think it's like 8 or something, but. And then for materials and colors, kind of same thing. You want at least 2 colors, you know, accent materials, things like that. Point is to just make sure that we don't get, to be honest, just little monopoly blocks planted everywhere. And so we looked at this. This is a combination of different design standards from different jurisdictions, and just kind of picking which ones that we feel are broad enough that we can require it outright. This is not through design review. These are minimum requirements. So this is not a design review process. This is minimums. So we wanted to keep them broad enough that they can be complied with, and we don't get 1,000 requests to not do them, which just frustrates you and it frustrates staff too, but also be enough that it's definitely going to make an improvement to what we've received. For the future, as part of this amendment packaging, and I haven't gotten it too in depth with these things, which would be site and building design standards overall, similar to the multifamily, but for residential developments, commercial and industrial, just in general for those zoning districts, you have to comply with X. You need to have, I don't know, this many materials on an industrial building versus a commercial, things like that. And as Robin mentioned, the specific use provisions, I just picked a couple that are definitely in there. Car washes, because those have changed over the years. Drive-throughs, obviously, with their impacts. Flex space, which is a semi-new use to the valley, but we also, our code is mute on it, and so we get a lot of discussions and requests for it, but we don't discuss it in our code, so it makes it difficult to regulate it. So then we have to come up with weird ways to do it. So let's create that, put it in the use table, put it in the specific use provisions, and move forward. And then again, the scenic corridor overlay zone, just what are those main entry points to the city that we want to have even more requirements to make sure that our entry to Caldwell is beautiful. So with that, Robin and I will stand for any other input and direction you guys have.
Very good. Thanks so much. Questions? Councilor Stradek?
Mr. Mayor, maybe you can answer it, but are we gonna have any restrictions on murals downtown on sides of buildings and stuff? You know, we've got, I've mentioned this before, we have beautiful big buildings downtown, and if you go up to Boise, I mean, some of those murals are just gaudy looking. Are we gonna have any restrictions on that, or?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and we actually just were having some emails this week on some thoughts of bringing to council to get your opinions on it. Obviously, it wasn't presented tonight, but we're preparing on that. So one of the thoughts was, so we have a design review commission that reviews that. So a thought is of putting a council member or 2 council members on that design review commission. It'll be kind of similar like urban renewal, where there's council members on there. Then bring that back, so that way the whole council isn't reviewing and approving that, but there are council members on that commission, and they would be voting members. So that was one thought. So we want to bring that to council and have your discussion on that. But we thought that way you would get input from council members, and then obviously they could bring that back here. But we put that as a voting member on that design review commission that would review those.
Super.
Just volunteered.
Yes, Councilor Register.
Quick question about some of the design or the plans or developments. Does somebody go out and check after to make sure that they followed whatever it was that they presented to the council? And have we, or is that going to be a new thing where they, check the landscaping and everything that they promised us? It looks similar.
Yes, ma'am, yeah, Councilor registered. So we do a landscape inspection that checks all the common open space, landscaping, fencing, all those things, to exactly do what you're saying, to make sure that they actually installed what they said they were going to install. And that's part of the final plat thing that we've talked about, where when we get the final plat, and that's when we go out and do our inspection, well, they've already constructed most of it. And so now there's a lot of things where we're running into issues of timing. And so, yes, we do that. Now, when it comes to the design review, as we implement more of these standards, we will also be checking for those things, especially for the multifamily development and all the non-residential development.
I'm just gonna follow up on that real quick. Mayor and Council Register, great question. When council does put requirements on a development, like we've seen a lot of, elevations or something, and you've requested certain things on there, we do attach those as part, if we have a development agreement, we attach it as part of that. If we don't have a development agreement, then we will make note of that. We have a tracking sheet for our subdivisions if there are special conditions beyond the code, and we put those in there, and then when those come in for building permits, we check them at that time.
And just maybe to add to that too, so like for a building permit, for example, they have to get what's called a C of O, Certificate of Occupancy. So the planning is gonna go and review that. So for example, Tillian, when they wanted to get opened up, they had to get a C of O. Before that's signed, then they'll go and check and make sure that those requirements are all met. And if not, doesn't get signed until they are. So.
Right, that's absolutely correct. So we check it, thank you, Mayor, for clarifying that. We check it, when the building permit comes in, we make sure that the elevations, we look at it then to see that they've called out everything on the elevations for constructing it. And then before we do sign the C of O, if there are special conditions, we will go out and look at single family, and then we will hold up a C of O if something's not right. If there's no special conditions, then we don't do anything with certificate of occupancies for residential.
Yeah, Councilor Doty?
Yeah, so I just wanna make sure that our penalties are also, or fines are in line too, right? So sometimes we require the bigger, more expensive stuff, infrastructure and things to be built first, but if they're coming at the end, and whether it's true or not, let's say it's a stoplight that someone doesn't put in, if the fine is only $500 for not putting in a stoplight, that's a pretty good deal. So we have to make sure that either it's done first, which most developers want to earn some money before they put it in, but two, if the fine has to fit whatever the violation would be. And so, have those been reviewed as well?
Mayor and Councilor Doty, that's also a great question, and we have had recent discussions on that. When we have subdivisions, we do allow people, like if they can't get landscaping done right away, they can bond for it as part of the bond, and so we do have at least some teeth where if they don't do it, we have the money to go put that infrastructure in, that landscaping or whatever. The problem we found is when it's a commercial development or something that's not part of a plat, and they can't do their landscaping in the wintertime or whatever, and they haven't finished it. So the only teeth we really have is that C of O, but we don't want to hold them up from opening their business for 6 months. So part of one of the code amendments that will be coming before council is bond requirements for commercial buildings so that we can bond for landscaping. Currently, right now, we have them sign up a piece of paper that's a landscaping deferral that, to be honest with you, doesn't really have a lot of teeth to it. But we're going to actually put some language in the code, or proposed language, that they can bond for that landscaping for commercial development too. And if they want a landscaping deferral, they'll have to do that, a letter of credit or something, so that we at least have that money so that the city can go put in those improvements if we need to.
One follow-up.
Yeah, follow-up.
So, but not just landscaping, right? It will bond for those really expensive things that people usually wait a little while to put in, and I know we're requiring some things to come in phase 1 and phase 2 versus the end, but,
Yep.
and that's why we're requiring like the pools to be put in within a certain phase and things, so that if they get to the end, they're out of money, they just go, we're not gonna put in the pool. Are we requiring that bond as well, because the fine may be cheaper than putting in a swimming pool?
Yeah, Mayor and Councilor Jody, we could definitely look at that. I know that Joe he's writing some amendments right now for things just like that, to codify that they have to put in those amenities at a certain time during the phasing. They can't wait till the end to put them in. But we could also look at something like some type of letter of credit or bonding for those items to ensure that the money is there to put them in.
Yes, or even have them put it in earlier, and I think we're working on
I
that,
think that's what
because
he's
they could
working
use the same answer, right? We can't put in the pool because it's winter right now.
Yep.
And then they just never come back,
Yeah.
and then we fine them.
Yeah, and I think that's
$100.
actually what Joe's been working on, is to codify that they have to do it at an earlier time, and that they can't proceed with the next phase until that's done. And so I think he's working on language for that right now.
Councilor Williams?
Thank you. Comment and a couple of questions. First of all, I think just a a handshake, as long as you look them in the eye and ask them if they're serious. Two questions. Can you email me this PowerPoint? I'm sure as I go through it again, because I have to process, and this was really helpful. And thank you for not just reading it to us. I love that you didn't do that, but there's a lot more in there. And so if you could just email that, and if I'm asking for me, I don't know if anybody else wants it, but it'd be great for me to just go back through again and look at. And then question number two, as far as approval goes. So, when we started, you said this was section one, it'll come to us in March. Will that be the final approval of that section then? Or will we be, in the end, in August, have a chance to amend anything at that point? Can we go back, or are we approving this in sections and then that's done?
Mayor and Councilor Williams, we're trying to bring these amendment package to you in sections, but we can always go back and amend codes at any time. So say we amend something now and 6 months from now it's not working or whatever, we can do that. The first amendment package is supposed to come to you in March. That would be your final approval unless you want to continue it for some reason, get more information. You can certainly do that. The reason we didn't really workshop that one, there's not a whole lot to it, so I can send it out to you early. This second package, we fully recognize we're probably going to have to do another workshop with you because there's a lot more things that we didn't have the ability to touch on that we're not finished with yet. Like as Joe mentioned, you know, we're creating a section that's going to have base guidelines for any residential, any commercial, and any industrial kind of development, just at least some base guidelines that they have to meet for design or whatever. And we haven't finished writing those yet. So we realize we're going to have to come back, and if we need to go over even the things we touched on today in more detail again, we are happy to do that. As I showed up there, package 2 through 5, those are tentative dates. If council says, hey, we want to workshop this more before this goes forward, those dates are not set in stone. We can workshop them as much as you desire. We can have as in-depth conversations as you desire and take as much time as you need to feel comfortable with moving forward with those ordinance amendments.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilor Stoddard.
Rob, I just want to dovetail off what Councilor Doty said relative to bonding. Before the stoplight went in on South Indiana and Karcher, there were numerous accidents. I used to live out there, and Cirrus Point went in and they were required to put in a stoplight. And I don't know what happened, but the city forgave that and it didn't go in, and of course the accidents continued to happen. And then when Sienna Hills, I think, went in, then they put the stoplight in. So we want to stop, like a Cirrus Point, if they said, or we said, you got to put in a stoplight, they have to put it in. So we want to do that.
Okay.
So.
Absolutely. And Councilor Stoddard, I will get with Rob and we can work through all those details on what that looks like for infrastructure improvements and what we can bond for and how that process can all work, and we can make that program more robust.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions? Council? No? Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Excellent. Very well done. We look forward to the future and those changes and discussing this more at those times. So that would end us. We do have some time in between, so it gives us time to stretch and even maybe go get some dinner. You might haven't even enough time for that.
That's what we were hoping for, to give you a little bit of
Thank you so much.
break.
So we'll be back at 6 o'clock for our regular scheduled city council meeting.
I just want to see, let me see there.